Thank you very much, Captain Kramer, for the very nice introduction. First, I just would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It is truly my privilege and honor to attend this very distinguished gathering. I also just want to say that it gives me great pleasure to be back to Canada. I remember that I first visited Vancouver, not the island. I learned that upon arrival at the airport. So I visited Vancouver more than 10 years ago. Canada is just as beautiful as before. And the only differences between now and then is that China now is the second largest economy in the world. And I was a poor graduate student back then, and now I'm an associate professor. So I only wish that I could become full professor before China becomes the largest economy in the world. So I only have 15 minutes, so try to, in my presentation, share with you my understanding of the question of the evolution of China's concept of sea power and maritime strategy. This or this?
This is forward.
Oh, okay. All right. Here we go. So for most part of the time since 1949, China's maritime strategy military development has been predominantly an army-oriented one. And from 1950 to early 80s, China's naval strategy can be defined as one of coastal defense. In 1985, though, the commander of PLA Navy, Admiral Liu Huaqing, formalized this very famous later becomes the offshore defense strategy, or near sea in Chinese, as part of China's military modernization strategy. Admiral Liu later has been widely regarded as the father of China's modern navy, and he defines near sea as Chinese sea areas to the west of the first island chain, including the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea, and the South China Sea. Admiral Liu argued that China's Navy must obtain 4 operational capabilities in the future. Number 1, to seize and maintain command of the sea in near sea. Number 2, to effectively control important sea line of communications adjacent to Chinese sea areas. Number 3, to carry out operations in sea areas adjacent to Chinese ones. And number 4, to acquire a robust nuclear counterattack capability. It has been noted by scholars that strategic thinking on sea power actually has been predominantly influenced by Alfred Thayer Mahan. The writings of Mahan were first translated and introduced into China actually back in 1900. 10 years after Mahan published his classic, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. The first complete Chinese translation of his book, however, did not appear until 1998, published by the POA Press. Despite the predominant impact of Mahan in China, some Chinese strategic analysts in recent years have begun to criticize Mahan. And for instance, in a recently published book, a group of authors, mostly the military scholars, offer a very interesting critique of Mahan, which is worth quoting here. Quote unquote, although Mahan's theory still has its reasonable value, the high interdependence of global economy prevents any country from using its force at its will. The times when one country achieves maritime security through war and hegemony has forever gone. Now, I would like to share with you my understanding of the sea power. I think the sea power can actually be conceptualized in at least 3 ways in China, in Chinese literature. The first is a legalistic one. So here, sea power or hai chuan in Chinese, and the chuan means to power. I think the term chuan can be conceptualized as rights. So therefore, hai chuan in this context refers to maritime rights and benefits as stipulated by international law. And secondly, the term Chuan can also be conceptualized as power. So it has defensive realism as its intellectual orientation. And here, the term Haichuan refers to the maritime power or a state's capacity to realize its goals, be it strategic security, military, or economic. And lastly, the term Chuan can also be conceptualized as, or in a vein of offensive realism, can also be conceptualized as hegemony. And in this context, the term Haichuan in Chinese would means the dominance at sea beyond territorial waters. So what is the Chinese public's view of sea power? A recent poll actually reveals that about 79% of the Chinese public actually agrees, they endorse a legalistic interpretation of sea power. So viewing it as the maritime rights and benefits of China, China enjoys according to international law. And in comparison, only about 16% of the surveyed Chinese public actually take an offensive realist interpretation of sea power, viewing it as the power to control or dominate sea. Therefore, I think it is worth noting that although quite some among the surveyed public holds that China should react strongly in response to other countries' acts that are perceived to be encroaching upon China's maritime rights and benefits. And in fact, few supports the more aggressive idea that China should seek overseas hegemony by engaging outward expansion. In December 2008, China announced that it would dispatch 2 destroyers and 1 supply vessel for an escort mission in the Gulf of Aden, marking China's participation in the international counter-piracy operations. And by September this year, China has sent altogether 18 fleets for escort missions, and total of more than 14,000 Navy officers, sailors have taken part in these missions. And the POA Navy fleets have completed more than 760 missions and escorted more than 1,700 commercial ships, including charter ships of UN World Food Program. The implications are threefold. Number one, China's participation in the international counter-piracy operations has greatly improved POA Navy's ocean-going combat capabilities. And number two, it also marks a shift from an offshore defense strategy to one of a combination of the offshore sea defense and the so-called distant sea defense strategy. As China's global presence and interest continue to grow in the years and decades to come, I would expect that the POA Navy will increasingly become a blue water Navy in the next 2 to 3 decades. Arguably, the 1995-96 Taiwan Strait crisis had greatly spurred China's naval buildup and produced a maritime strategy that has a fixation on a Taiwan contingency. And since 2008, however, China's maritime strategy has undergone a significant transformation that goes beyond Taiwan. And specifically, I think 3 factors explain such a transformation. Number one, as cross-strait relations greatly improved after the year 2008, following the election of a pro-unification leader in Taiwan, there is a relative decline of the urgency of a Taiwan contingency in the Chinese mainland's overall maritime strategy. Meanwhile, however, the maritime territorial disputes in the East China Sea and the South China Sea are on the rise. And lastly, with the rise of non-traditional security threats, the conceptual framework of military operations other than war, or MOOTW in short, has become an important integral part of China's strategic and military doctrines, including maritime strategy. And consequently, more emphasis has been put on MOOTW, including such as counter-piracy, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief and search and rescue, etc. Now, we all know that China is learning to operate its first aircraft carrier, the Liaoning, and which actually symbolized China's rising naval capability in the most salient way. So now the key question is how China should use its increased naval power. And I would argue that China should better provide international public goods while defending its national interests. And here also I would propose two concept of mine. I call it a cooperative deterrence and cooperative deterrence compellence. And don't ask me, because the limit of time I wouldn't elaborate on what those terms mean, but I will be more than happy to share with you more thoughts during Q&A. Or unless Captain Kramer will give me another 15 minutes, I will be more than happy to talk about that. The Obama administration responds to uncertainties brought by the economic and military rise of China by pursuing a pivot rebalancing to Asia strategy, which puts a premium on strengthening alliances and partnership in Asia. Meanwhile, the United States also hedges by attempting to promote meal-to-meal exchanges with China with the aim of establishing maritime. One of the goals was to establish maritime code of conduct so as to reduce risks and miscalculation. And the Chinese reaction has been quite increasingly positive. In fact, China sent the largest fleet other than the United States, including a destroyer, frigate, supply vessel, and medical ship, as well as over 1,400 Navy officers and sailors to participate in the 2014 Reimpact exercise, even after the senior Chinese military officials spat with U.S. counterparts at the Shangri-La dialogue. Well, they had little quarrel. I would argue this is a sign of maturity or a measure of more resilience in the meal-to-meal relations between China and the United States. As the U.S. President Obama has recently noted in an interview, that it is inevitable that China will become one of the dominant powers in the region. The evolution in China's concept of sea power and maritime strategy is indicative of the reality of the rise of Chinese power, including its naval power. I think such a reality poses challenges, but also offers opportunities to China, the United States, and the region. So how the United States and China can avoid falling to the so-called, what Captain Kramer has referred to as the Thucydides trap, which meaning the old pattern of great power conflict between rising power and an established power, and build a new model of major country relationship is a big question facing leaders and strategic elites in both countries, and I think that in the international community as well. So I believe that their answer to such a question will to a great extent determine the peace, stability, and prosperity of the region and beyond. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.